to the larger stage. That's what got him on Larry King Live, Ellen DeGeneres, all of these things. And he was 72 years old when that happened. So it's, it's never too late to catch that big break. That's for sure.
And, on that topic, we've talked to two people actually that were in The Secret with him this weekend. Actually, I didn't realize all three people we had booked this weekend for main speakers were connected to The Secret. You're connected to The Secret, Marcy Shimoff is, and Joe is. And I heard both their stories. Do you happen to know the story of, so Marcy and Joe had different stories. Like Joe was going to turn it down. He's like, oh, I get approached by a lot of people. And then they wanted him to travel. And he's like, I'm too busy. And then they said, what if we just fly you here 2 hours in and out? And I think a big reason why they wanted him in it was because he was writing on the law of attraction. He had the attraction factor, like he was in that realm. But I'm curious, do you know how it came to be that your father was in it? Meaning, was there any story behind it? Or I know was a part of the Transformational Leadership Council with Jack Canfield. I believe he was.
No, he actually wasn't.
Okay, cool. So now I'm really curious. Do you know the story?
I do, and it's a great story. We talk about the law of attraction. So he always knew that big break was going to come. He wasn't planning on being in the movie The Secret. He didn't even know about it. He was traveling at the time when they were filming. I believe it was a week before the big filming was to take place, and it was happening in Aspen, Colorado. His phone was chock full of messages. He couldn't get to them all. So he called his assistant, Gina, who I believe you know, and asked Gina to go through all of his voice messages. And he said there was one message from a lady in Australia, he said, but I couldn't quite understand what it was about. And it was something about a movie. And so Gina reached out to everybody, and she reached out, and it was actually Rhonda Byrne's sister that she was talking to. And they said that they really wanted him in this movie that they were creating, but they weren't able to get a hold of him. And it was probably too late because they were filming literally the following weekend. And Gina said to this lady that, his schedule is fully booked. They said, well, we're filming in Aspen, Colorado next weekend. Well, my father was speaking in Aspen, Colorado that weekend in a hotel right across the street. And the crazy thing is he had only ever been to Aspen, Colorado one other time in his entire life. So he was there. So he said, yes. He says, I can go across at my lunch hour. He filmed for literally 1 hour and then walked back across the hotel back to his meeting. And that's how he got into The Secret. So it's pretty astonishing when you think about it. It was totally, he was just there. It was law of attraction. You couldn't paint a better story than that one.
Wow. I'm sort of shocked. So I assume most of the people involved, I shouldn't assume, but I'll conclude most of the people involved didn't have any idea how big it was going to be. Did he have any idea?
Nobody did. Yeah, nobody did. You know what? I see Stephen Boucher. I can see your comment here. The Magic's saying yes. You know something? There's so much power in that when I see this. That was what my father was all about. He would say yes to just about anybody that was trying to do something. And he never said yes with an attachment to an outcome. If he could help, he would do it. And that's what he did for this movie. He didn't have a clue what it was going to be. He didn't know who Rhonda Byrne was at the time, didn't know how the production was going to turn out. He got a copy of the CD, I think, for the movie, and it was probably a month or 2 months after he got it before he even saw it. And when he saw it, he watched it at home with his wife, Linda, and he said to Linda, he said, I think this movie might do something. So yeah, he didn't have a clue what it was going to be or how it was going to be received.
Wow. Magic is all I can say, Brian. That's amazing. Switching gears a little bit. It's still tied to it, but your book, I've said this to you, I think 4 or 5 times now. Love the title. I think it's brilliant. And feel free to share the story with us, but I know you mentioned that. Now, I'll go by memory on this, but I believe, your father knew you were writing the book. He was encouraging you writing the book, but I don't believe he knew the title. Am I correct? Which
yeah.
I love.
Yeah, the book is called My Father Knew the Secret, Growing Up with Bob Proctor. And I started to write the book, yes, when he was alive. He knew I was writing the book. Um, I felt I had a book in me. Now it seems I've just released another book this week, so there's more coming. But I was saying to my wife, I said, I know that, I've got a book in me. Dad always says, we've all got a book in us. We just have to find what that is. And I said, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to write about. And she looked at me almost like I had two heads. And she said, Brian, said, all these events, all the seminars you're at, what's the first thing everybody asks you? It's like, what's it like being Bob Proctor's son? And I thought, boy, there you go. I could write a unique spin on what it is like to be Bob Proctor's son, what I learned along the way, how I took his lessons and applied them in my own life. And so that's what I started to write. And I was probably maybe a third of the way through the book while he was alive, and we had a lot of fun around it. I was sharing with him some of the passages that I was writing, and I was getting clarification on some of the stories, and then he passed away. And it took me, oh gosh, I think it was 3 months before I could even start writing again. And I know you've read the book, Corey. So the first chapter in the book is the first thing I wrote after he passed, and that was a tough one. I still did not know what the name of the book was going to be. I remember talking with Dad about it, and he had a great response. He just said, Brian, just relax, don't worry about it. It'll come when it's supposed to come. And I can vividly remember I was dreaming about him. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I had a vivid dream about my father, and I woke up, and that title was in my head. My father knew the secret. And I 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes these things don't stick with you. So I literally got out of bed and I wrote it down. And I knew right away that was the title for the book, because he really did know the secret. And, the word the secret, let's face it, tied with that movie, those books, that was really the moment that propelled him to the larger stage. And so I thought it was a good play on words. It just felt right. And that's how the book title came to be.
Amazing. Well, I promised people that I would ask you a specific question, and I think I've asked you this question twice, and I put you on the spot. And I always say, just more so, whatever answer I think comes to you first is probably the one that makes the most sense. But if you could, and maybe it goes to the book, something you wrote in the book, or in general, if you could think of what is you feel the greatest life lesson or two that you learned from your father, is there anything that just kind of jumps right out at you?
Well, yeah, so there's a couple. I think the overall greatest lesson, I'll give you two. The overall greatest one is simply this, is to really choose a worthy goal. Pick a goal that is going to inspire you, something that you don't know how you're going to reach, but it inspires you to do something different every single day, that you experience growth. When we're chasing a worthy goal, we'll do things in a day that we would never normally do. And we will accomplish far more than if we just live day to day to day. That would be really the number one thing. I think the one that's probably right there with me now is the last lesson I learned from him. You know, Gosh, Corey, I remember just sitting with Dad in the hospital a few days before he passed, and we would sit there for hours, just holding hands. He'd fall asleep. He'd wake back up. We would chat for a little bit. He'd fall back asleep. The one thing he kept saying to me, he says, Brian, keep talking to me. See, my father and I had a very special relationship. Yes, we were father and son, we were business partners, but we were also best friends. I mean, we would talk to each other every day. And he said to me, he said, Brian, keep talking to me, even when I'm gone. He says, you'll hear my response in your inner voice. We can call that intuition, call it whatever you want, but keep speaking to me and listen for the answers. And that's what I do. I still do that. He's been gone 2.5 years now. I do talk to him every day. And I choose to believe, my intuition is my father speaking to me. I have followed my intuition to a fault almost over the last couple of years. It has caused me to do things that have really made me uncomfortable, things that I never would have expected I'd be doing. But my intuition tells me to do it. I do it. I don't question it. We so often have these intuitive hits, and sometimes, there are things that we're doing that we hear this intuition saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that." And a month, 2 months down the road, you think, "Oh, I knew I shouldn't have done that." And it comes back to bite you. Or something else that comes to us, we don't do it because we think, "Oh, I'm not good enough for that," or I can't do that. We get these paradigms, those little voices telling us that, that's not for us. And, maybe a year down the road, it's like, "Oh man, I wished I had done that. Things would have been so different." Well, I literally follow my intuition to a T now, and I don't question it. If my inner voices say, "Oh, you can't do that," or what, I don't listen to it. If my intuition says to do something, I do it. If it says not to do something, I don't do it. There's many situations where I politely said no, but there's many other situations that I've said yes that have put me in very uncomfortable places. But I have found that stepping into that uncomfort has changed my life. I've grown in ways that I never thought I would. So that would be the other lesson, is to truly, we've all got it, is to truly listen to your intuition. They say when we pray, we're speaking to God. Intuition is God speaking to us. I think we really need to listen to that.
Wow, it's a mic drop. I have to say, Danielle pointed out, which I had been conscious of, that we actually were in the middle of one of our experts boot camps, one of our very first ones when your father passed. And at least when we heard about it. So I got a message from somebody and they said, "Did you hear this?" And I thought, well, it's kind of my obligation to share it during the boot camp so people find out that way. And yeah, it's just kind of wild. There's another synergy there. We were running one of these boot camps. It was like, I think 2 days later that we were running. Yeah. Wow. I want to ask you as well. So it's funny when you mentioned the intuition side of things, it's interesting how this comes to me right away. So I won't say the name of the person that connected me originally with your father, because the person's pretty private, and he's like one of those guys that, and I'll tell you off air sometime, but he's one of those guys, he worked with your father directly. I'll give one hint and people wouldn't be able to figure it out from this, but he's a Grammy winning producer. But he's a very private guy. And so he wouldn't want me saying this person connected me with people, because he also connected me with Les Brown. But I'll never forget when he sent the message to your father, because he texted me and your father in a group text, and he said, "Corey's doing this cool project. You need to say yes. Please say yes," or something like that. And your father said, "Anything for ... his name." But when I sat in front of your father, his first words were, "You know why I agreed to this interview?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Because he's never asked me to interview or talk to one person ever." So my intuition said, if he's asking me to talk to a person, no matter what I have on my plate, I need to say yes.
Right.
I think that's a prime example of him following his intuition and listening to his intuition.
It really is. And he was a master at it. He always listened to his intuition. And I'd like to say that was the last lesson that he really drilled into my head.
Wow. Well, I was going to ask you too, as far as the Think and Grow Rich book, I think it's become iconic in terms of people knowing that your father carried around the book. But for those that may not know that, you shared with me, I think, you knew how old the book was because it was so close to your birthday. So how long did he carry around the copy of Think and Grow Rich that he read from every single day?
So he carried that copy for over 60 years. He was given that book in October of 1961. I was born in December of 1961. That's why I say I was there for the whole ride. And that book, my God, you want to talk about energy in something. Boy, you can feel the energy of my father in that book. It is something special to hold. He studied that literally every day for over 60 years. The book was really, it was falling apart. If he had a great big rubber band that would hold it together, and he'd pull the rubber band off. He always had it at every seminar, and he would open it up and the pages were falling out. He had highlighted and underlined pages. It was just, the energy in this thing was incredible. He had many people say that, they wanted to get it rebound for him or wanted to get him a new book. he would have nothing to do with it. That book was kind of the one thing that was there for his entire journey, and it really meant something to him. And so, yeah, it's over 60 years of studying the same thing. And you talk about the value of repetition. I mean, that speaks volumes right there.
Yeah, and I remember him telling me the story that Gina was looking to get it bound for him when he went away on a trip, and then she, for whatever reason, maybe went with her intuition to say, "Oh, wait till he gets back and tell him," because she was going to do it as a surprise. And he said, "Hell yeah, I wouldn't have been happy if that book had been rebound. I didn't know because of course he always brought it with him, and it was this one time for some reason. I think he left it. I don't know what the reasoning was, but he just said she was planning to get it rebound. And yeah, like you said, many people mentioned it, but I know he didn't want it rebound because he mentioned that a couple of times. And I honestly I got to hold it twice. Once when I was interviewing him, and then once Brian after his passing when I was interviewing you.
Yeah.
And it's I can't say this every time, but this is truly one of those rare times where I truly feel and felt something holding that book. It wasn't just like you're holding a book. There was literally an energy, and that was still while he was with us. There was an energy when you held that book, and so I can understand why he didn't want it altered or touched at all.
Oh yeah, that book has so much meaning. He often joked that when he died, he said he wasn't going to leave anything to any of his kids, and he meant it. But we didn't get any kind of inheritance or anything of that nature. What he taught us was all the inheritance that we needed, and that's for there's three of us. But I'll tell you the one thing is that book, and Linda, his wife, has that book right now, and that book is on its way to me whenever she decides to leave this earth or give it to me beforehand, and that's, to me, that is probably the most special thing. As you know, Corey, just holding that thing, you can feel it. That book was such a big part of his life. It was such a everything. It really was.
I think another thing, this kind of maybe not related to Bob's teachings, but I think another thing that a lot of people may not realize, they will if they grab your book, because if you remember, it's one of the first things I asked you is the dogs that loved him so much. So I have a Pomeranian, you people know, named Lego. And the first thing I noticed was the photos of him and the Pomeranians. And so you shared the story with me, if you're open to sharing that, about how those dogs loved him, but there was always one that would chase the other ones out of the studio and stuff like that. Can you share that a little bit? Like, what was him? And I think Linda was the one originally, right, with the Pomeranians? Like that it was her, or was it both?
No, it was both of them. They've had several Pomeranians over the years, and there was always, they usually always had two at a time. And for whatever reason, one would be the special one for Dad. At one time, it was Missy Love. The last go around, the two that are alive right now, it was Dolly. And he would always take one of them into the studio with him. And they would sit in a little dog bed at his feet. And they would not let the other dog in the studio. It was the funniest thing. And when my father was an early morning guy, he'd usually go into the studio between 5 and 6 a.m. And he'd say, "Okay, I'm going out now." And the one dog would run right to his feet and stand there waiting for him to pick it up and take it out to the studio. It was just kind of a loving little thing.
I think it's just amazing though, because it gives you a glimpse into the person as well. Like, it sounds strange, but one of the people I interviewed who has a public persona that doesn't match who he really is if people watch the reality show or heard of it, Storage Wars, the guy on the show whose name is Dave Hester, he's the guy that always said, "Yeah," he was known for that. And he always looked at it like the evil villain, everybody, and people really thought that's who he was. And the guy has two pugs, and he's like a pug lover, and he's like the nicest guy ever. But he knew that for reality TV, he was better to portray a character, and he knew the character of the evil villain guy would get noticed and build his brand more. But honestly, he's like the softest guy ever. Like, he's like, "I can't wait to go to PEI so you guys can take us fishing," and he's just the nicest guy. And and so I mean, it's just interesting when you hear how a person treats animals and how they are affectionate in different ways that you wouldn't think. I think it just gives you another glimpse into the person, which is why when I saw it in your book, I'm like, I told Shelly right away, and I said, I need to ask Brian about the dogs, and yeah. what the connection was. So that's amazing.
Yeah, he had quite a little connection with him. It was fun.
Amazing. So before, and if you're okay with it, Brian, my plan was to open it up for some questions from people watching as well.
Sure.
Just before I do that, just a couple last questions. One I wanted to ask you is, from your own career, is there stuff that you can think that you've been doing in the last couple of years? Like I know you mentioned one already, which is following your intuition and kind of the growth side of things as well. But is there any other things that you feel that you've been doing in the last couple of years that you may not have done before that's helping your career and taking you in that direction?
Well, things like this, getting on summits, on podcasts, getting on stage speaking. That was always my father. That was not me. That was not something I ever, quite frankly, anticipated I'd be doing. But I have stepped into it. I've stepped across that threshold of terror and decided that you know what, I've got something to say. So that would be the big thing. I think in any of this stuff, we need to know where we're going and why we're going there. Make sure we do it for the right reasons. And if we're going to a special place, if we want something more in our life, you have to step through that terror barrier. When you step through that, you'll find that it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be. And you might not be great at I would have to think that my first podcast, my first time on stage, it was probably terrible. But I kept doing it because I knew I needed to. And I would get better and better and better. None of us are great first time around at anything we try. But if we keep going at it, we'll keep getting better. And I often say to anybody that if you've got a worthy goal, most of us we're waiting for that big thing to happen. And this is my latest book is called 12 Easy Steps to Change Your Life. And instead of waiting for that big thing to happen, we need to take care of the little things. In its simplest form, if we did one little thing, even if it seems really insignificant, one little thing every day to get us one step closer to our dream, in a year's time, that's 365 little things. I promise you that will add up into something big. And that's really what it's all about.
You know what's fascinating? Two things that popped into my head when you were saying both of those areas. So one little thing and stepping outside your comfort zone, the terror barrier. That one makes me think of Neil Donald Walsh and his great quote. What is it? Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. I never understood that quote until it happened for me. So expand my comfort zone and realize, oh my gosh, none of this life I have today would have happened without me getting outside that barrier. That's one thing that really just popped into my head when you were saying that is that it is true that outside your comfort zone is where everything sort of lies. So, I'm glad you shared that. And also something you shared there is that it doesn't matter where you start. I always say it's what you do next. So it's like when I started speaking, I was terrible. John Lee Dumas, who has the big Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast, leaves his first episode up so people can hear how terrible he was when he started. And that's where we all start pretty much. There's not many born, what did Ziegler say, born salesmen, most people have to learn these skills. So I'm glad you said that you have to start somewhere. You knew you'd get better. I do see a question in the chat I wanted to ask you about, which is now I don't know if this person has any insight that you maybe give books out, but if you gift books to people, the question is, what book does Brian gift to people?
Well, I can tell you the one right now. Obviously my own books, I'm forever sending out signed copies, but if I was to pick one that's not mine, this is the one I'm reading right now. It is called The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. It's spectacular. It's really, it's clean, it's simple, and it's deep, but in an easy way. I don't know if you know who Rick Rubin is.
I do.
If you look at Rick Rubin, you'd think they just pulled him in off the street. And this guy's worth, I believe, hundreds of millions of dollars. He's a music producer. Really an interesting guy to listen to. And what I love about Rick Rubin is that his message, his way of being is simply this. He tries to create something of greatness for himself. He doesn't worry about how everybody else will think. He knows that if he creates greatness for himself, other people are going to like it. And boy, if we could all live that way, if we do great things for ourselves, if we make it the best we can make it, the rest of the world is going to like it. And there's a lot in that. So that would be the thing right now. It's a great book.
Well, yeah, so to your point, I've been following Rick Rubin for a long time, and I had no idea until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, philosophically was. Like what did it for me is I started seeing interviews that he was doing. Like he did the Paul McCartney. There's like a documentary on Paul McCartnney and Rick Rubin together. Jay-Z and him did a video together, like not just a music video, but an interview type series. And yeah, I had no idea. It was Rick, right, that did Johnny Cash's tour albums that made Johnny Cash big again. But yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out because I've heard a bit about the book and haven't grabbed it. The one other thing that came to my mind around something you said about the one small thing every day, and I was like, popped my head, and I'm like, what was that again? And then so I left it because I didn't want to try to remember it in real time, but I remembered it. Is a great example of that, I think, is The Rule of Five by Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen. I don't know if you ever heard what they did, but with Chicken Soup, every day, their deal was they had to do 5 things, no matter how big or small, 5 things to push the Chicken Soup series further. And so every day they try to figure out what are our 5 things. And the power of, in their case, 2 people. So it's like the rule of 10, really, because they could each do 5. So that could be a small little tiny interview in a town where nobody's heard of them. But one of those things, I shared this the other day. I don't know if you've heard this, Brian, but one of those things on one day was they sent copies of the book to Judge Ito, the O.J. Simpson trial, and they wanted the jurors to be able to have something to read while they were deliberating. So all the jurors, they were only able to get the one book because they had to get it approved. And then apparently a few of the jurors came out whenever they were reading the verdict, carrying the book. So the media is like, snap, 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 what is that book? And apparently one of the guys being interviewed by the media said, oh, it's something that this guy, Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen gave to us. And he said, I think it was Mark that said to me, he said they figure that advertising is somewhere between $5 and $20 million.
That's amazing. I've never heard that story. That's very
it's one of the rule of 5.
right.
So it's it's pretty, and I share that Marcy Shimoff, and she actually was the one that created the idea of Chicken Soup for the Women's Soul, and she hadn't heard that story, which I thought was fascinating. I think I shared with you the story, and I think I shared it here at the boot camp, but just in case, I think I shared with you the original name for Think and Grow Rich, right?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How to make a boodle with your noodle.
Yeah.
Still blows my mind. I think it's I think it's good as publishers told them to go and meditate on it and come up with a different title.
Probably a good thing.
So let me ask you one more question, then we'll open it up for questions in general. But what about, and I asked your father about this, but I have a good memory, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. I'm trying to remember one of the things your father said to me was about meditation. And he said the idea of, actually somebody gave me a different question, I think now, that I was going to ask. But the meditation, he said, he thinks it's one of the greatest gifts that if a person doesn't use it, they're wasting it. The ability to meditate. How big do you think a part of was meditation in his life?
I think it was a big part of his life. He would do that every morning. So I've adopted his morning routine, and it's simply this. He would go out in the studio first thing in the morning, and he had 2 journals. And I've got 2 journals right here on my desk. One is a gratitude journal. He would start to write out all the things he was grateful for. He said, when you start your day off like that, you start to look for the good that's around you. He always said that, we've got to start not letting our outside circumstance, our current environment dictate the way we are in this world. We start from the inside out. You want to change your outside circumstance, you have to start here. And so he would start to write out what he was grateful for, all the good things that were in his life. And the other journal that he had was I call it a goal journal. I just write out my goal every day. And then what he would do after that is he would meditate, and he would ask for guidance in his day, and he would start to focus on where he was going, what he wanted to do. That was how he started his day. And I think, boy, there's a lot of value in that. If you can start your day in a way like that, you take control of your day rather than let the day take control of you. And I think that's why he was so effective.
Amazing. So, Brian, now I'm going to jump into questions for everyone else. And I'll say,
So I'm going to end this now because this is a live stream video I've been taking of the Experts Bootcamp but it's for people usually who have signed up to the boot camp. So I've given you a lot of live information, and I think it's only fair that people who are asking questions from the audience now get to do that in privacy. So that was Corey Poirier talking to Brian Proctor, who's Bob Proctor's son. And Bob Proctor was associated with the massive film called The Secret, which is about the law of attraction. So I hope you enjoyed this behind the scenes footage live. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
So I